I had to really understand that verse because I was turning it into poetry. And so I really needed to understand as far as I could what it meant. So it was a nice meditation. You can embrace me, you can love me, you can break my heart, you can harm me, basically destroy me.
Gurudev, we are live, but we are in Mahatma Das, not in His Grace. So
it's live on Mahatma Das, but not.
Yes.
You're going to send that message to His Grace?
Yes.
Okay. Complications, huh? I must, yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to keep you entertained while I was looking for a document the easy way. It became the hard way. You ever try to do something easy and it's harder? Okay. So we'll continue reading. Part of the context of what we're reading is explains how people process spiritual life, like because spiritual life is different than material life, and we're used to material life, so we don't have to make any adjustments. But when you come to spiritual life, it's so much different, at least different in many ways. And so some of the adjustments we make are healthy, some of the adjustments we make are not so healthy. And so this article is nice because it relates to many things, but it also relates to how we're adjusting in the spiritual process, and especially how we can misunderstand the process, misapply it in our own lives. And maybe the worst thing is when we misunderstand it and misapply it, if we're given leadership roles, then we will cause other people to misapply it. Or another problem is when you're a leader, maybe you can apply something in a certain way, but not everyone else can. And if you expect everyone else to apply it the way you applied it, then it's a problem. Now, I heard something this weekend, sort of relates to this, which I found very interesting. Two different talks by and similar points. So one of the talks, it said that in the Eastern tradition, when they describe something, they start with the highest standard and they go down. Like Krishna says, just be a pure devotee. If you can't do that, do bhakti. If you can't do that, do karma. If you can't do karma, just do some welfare work. He said in the Western traditions, they tend to start the other way. Well, just be good. And if you can, do that for God, that's better. And if you could actually follow some sadhana, that's better. And, so they take you from the beginning and they go up. Isn't that interesting? So I think that explains some of the confusion. Like if you came to Krishna consciousness and there were books just saying, just try to chant 2 rounds and just try to do this, things which you could do, then it might be easier to process than you read, if you don't chant 64, basically you're a bum. But, Prabhupada was merciful to the fallen souls of Kali Yuga, so he gave you 16. And if you think 16 is too much, then basically you're just crazy. That's kind of how it could sound, right? So then you feel awkward when you read that. So that's good to know. It's good to know. There's another thing that's good to know. There's some kind of strange allergy going around here. So you have to excuse me. When I get these allergies, it feels like there's ants crawling in my nose. That's the best way I could describe it. There's another thing that's done in the East. A lot of times when a guru or teacher from the East wants to make a point, they will say something that will shake you up. Like it's kind of like a volcano or an earthquake. So sometimes you'll hear Prabhupada say something like really heavy, and it's out of character. In other words, what he's saying and how he acts is much different. But he says it, they say things to like get the point. You know, I tell you something. I say, Luke, you know, you shouldn't do this. And Luke thinks, yeah, that's true. And then the next day he ends up doing it. Oh, I shouldn't have done it. I forgot. But if it's like, Luke, you'll go to a hell for 1 billion years if you do that. And I will make sure you go there if you do that. Oh, like, why did I say that? Because I couldn't get through the other way. And I know conditioned souls in Kali Yuga are dull. So I'll say something exaggerated, or graphic, So we say, you're just, we say, Krishna Premi, you're just attached to something, whatever it is. You're just attached to this. But then I make this sound like it's like the worst possible thing. And I make it sound like you're the stupidest person in the world to be attached to it. And then you're like, yeah, I shouldn't be attached. So sometimes they do that, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And it's not the worst attachment. But if you're stuck like super glue to it, they have to use something strong. So that's why you hear sometimes these very controversial statements by Prabhupada. Why is he so heavy? Because sometimes that's the only way we get the message, because we tend to be dull. Have you noticed you tend to be dull? Prabhu, I'm too dull to notice that I'm dull. That's my problem. If I wasn't so dull, I would notice how dull I was. And then the other point that was made was that these are coming from scholars, their observations of studying, Eastern teachings versus Western teachings, often on the same topic. It said that the Eastern teachers tend to generalize and the Western teachers tend to be specific. So sometimes we'll hear, these people, they're all dogs, camels, and asses, or they're all atheists. They're all, all women are like this. All men are like that. All people from China are like this. All people from Africa are like this. They're obviously describing certain people within that ethnicity or that nationality or that race. Not all of them. They said, but that's how it's done in the East. They just generalize. If it's 10 people out of 1,000, they'll say, they're all fools. That's how they do it. Whereas in the West, we will be more specific. This person who lives in this house did something foolish. He happens to be Chinese, but that doesn't mean anything about the other Chinese people. Something like that. So it's good to know all these things when you're studying Shastra and you're hearing from gurus, just so you don't collapse when you hear these things, that they're going to shake you up. They're going to start from the highest standard. They're going to generalize. It's good to know that. And so I think what we're reading now is just helping us to navigate how we hear these things and then how we apply and process, understand, and all doing that in a way which doesn't cause us to lose our common sense, doesn't cause us to become imbalanced or eccentric, fanatical, or in any way disrupt our ability to be compassionate, kind-hearted, affectionate human beings. Because ironically, sometimes when someone doesn't process detachment well, they become hard-hearted. They're so detached that if you tell them, I just got in an accident and broke 108 bones, they'll say, well, Prabhu, what's your problem? You're not the body. So they have become so detached, they've actually lost touch with, normal human compassion, or even sometimes spiritual compassion. Have you seen that before? So detached, you don't care. Get over it, Prabhu, who cares? Just chant your rounds, stop complaining. But I broke 108 bones. Well, Krishna's mercy, you probably should have broken 508. Stop complaining. So, of course, I'm exaggerating, but we have seen things in that direction happen. And maybe you've even seen it or even done it, God forbid. Okay. So we'll continue reading. If the majority of people have an avoidant attachment style of relating, then they will tend to be dismissive of other people's needs because they are dismissive of their own needs. How you treat yourself tends to be how you treat others. Then people feel justified in not respecting each other's feelings and needs. The word need often becomes a dirty word. And people no longer feel free to say what they need because they don't want. People no longer feel free to say what they need because they don't want to be seen as needy. So we try to be non-attached, but that is like an unripe fruit trying to detach itself prematurely from the branch and hurl itself to the ground instead of gradually ripening to the point where it's naturally ready to go. So I don't know if you've heard me talk about this, but I've often said that detachment is always a byproduct of spiritual advancement. So sometimes devotees will say, I want to become more detached. And as I said on Monday, well, there are certain things we must become detached from to form a basic sadhana practice. But when we're talking about higher levels of detachment, and you feel that you want to become more detached, you can't. You have to be more Krishna conscious. So when you say, I need to be more detached, just change it and say, I need to be more Krishna conscious, because if you're more Krishna conscious, you'll become more detached. That's what our Shastra says. It's a Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita. If you apply bhakti to Vasudeva, then Janayati Asu Bharagyam. What is born from that? Vairagya and Jnanam cha. Vairagyam. Janati Asu Bharagyam. Jnanam cha ahaitu. Causeless devotion. You'll get knowledge and you'll get detachment as a byproduct. Sound good? At no extra cost. Just do bhakti. It all comes in the box. You know how you order electronic and you're like, wow, they gave me a cable and they gave me batteries. And some electronics you get, you have to go out and buy the cable for it, and they don't give you batteries. So when you get bhakti, you get the cable and the batteries also. You don't have to buy them separately. So if you say, I need cables and battery, say, no, just, it's so weird. I don't know if you have this experience, but some of these products made in China are so inexpensive that you get the whole package with the cable, the batteries, and the product, and it's cheaper than if you went to a store just to buy the cable. You ever had that experience? If I have to go out and buy the cable and batteries, it's more expensive than the whole product. And sometimes people just buy the whole product and throw the product away because it's cheaper to get the cable that way. So you do bhakti. So, if you're regretting your level, if you're regretting, oh, I'm so attached, I need to be more detached. You can't really be more, you can't just be more detached. Of course, you can try and you can practice it. And as I said, there's certain levels of detachment that we have to practice, even if it's difficult, because it's necessary for a foundation upon which to practice our sadhana. But for deeper levels of detachment, if you're artificially detached, another one of the more profound statements that I've ever made. Here it comes. If you're artificially detached, it means you're artificially detached. Okay, think about that. What does that mean? If you're artificially detached, if you ever feel like, I don't know if this is real, it kind of feels artificial. Yeah, it is. Otherwise, you wouldn't say that. How do I know if it's artificial? Well, do you think it is? I kind of think it is. Well, you're right, Because if it wasn't, you probably wouldn't be thinking it. And how do I know it's not artificial? Because it's not. It just is. It's a byproduct of my advancement. Why would I think it's artificial if I'm not attached? I'm so detached from this. Is it really artificial? Well, did you really try to be detached? No, it just came as a result of my advancement. Well, that's how you know it's real. There's no struggle there. Does that make sense? If you're struggling to be detached from something, then the solution is more bhakti. Add a little more bhakti to your cereal in the morning, and the detachment will just come. That's it. That's how it works. You can't force it. Okay. So if you're an unripe fruit, that's premature detachment. And just hang out for a while in Krishna consciousness and you'll get ripe. The question for us as spiritual practitioners is how to ripen so we become naturally ready to let go of clinging to ourselves or clinging to others or being too self-centered or out of balance. Our practice of devotional service will definitely help with the ripening process. But if we're using our practice to avoid feeling life, this will definitely stunt the ripening process rather than support it. So basically, this has been the theme, using bhakti to avoid being introspective, to avoid being self-honest like that. Using bhakti to run from reality. Of course, we want to transcend mundane reality, but the reality is there. We have to deal with it. So if there's a reality that has to be dealt with, and you stick your head in the sand, the reality is still there when you pull your head out of the sand. Have you noticed that? If you close your eyes, nothing goes away just because you can't see it. A car's going to crash. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see myself die. Closing your eyes is not going to stop the car from crashing. So, spiritual bypassing not only corrupts our devotional life, it also blocks our personal ripening by making spiritual teachings into prescriptions about what we should do, how we should think, how we should speak, how we should feel. Then our spiritual practice becomes taken over by what might be called spiritual superego, the voice that whispers should in our ears. This was, sometimes a devotee asks, how should I feel about something? I understand the question. Because sometimes we have mixed feelings about something and we want to know what is the spiritual feeling and how we can adjust ourselves. But sometimes you're just feeling something and you might think, is this the right feeling or the wrong feeling? Should I feel this way? Shouldn't I? Sometimes it's not a question of you should or shouldn't, but it's more of a question of what you should do now that you feel this way, how to proceed. I told this story. It was a difficult time when Prabhupada left. A lot of devotees didn't know how to feel, because we're supposed to be like they were feeling devastated, but they didn't know if that was proper. They weren't sure about their own feelings. Should we feel devastated, or does that mean we're in Maya? And it's quite natural to feel devastated when your spiritual master leaves. And when the devotees asked me how they should feel, I felt really bad that they asked how they should feel. I thought, that's a problem when something like this happens, and naturally we're so distraught, but we're asking whether that's okay to feel that way. So, it's kind of funny if you think about it. There is truth to wanting to check in with our feelings to know if they're Krishna conscious, but it's kind of funny also. You say, I'm feeling this way. Is it okay? Prabhu, is it okay that I feel this way? Well, it's kind of too late now, isn't it? You're already feeling that way. So what do those feelings mean to you? That's the next step. Okay. Spiritual life is dynamic, it's individual. So what works for one of you may not work for all of you all the time. Some things work for all of us, some things don't. Yeah. Yeah, that's basically the message. It's individual. So the topic of should. Now, let me do something. This would be interesting. I'm going to go to the database, although it doesn't, the database is, here it is. Now I'm going to input the word should. Let's see how many shoulds there are. Oh my Govinda, 68,445 shoulds. Okay, that could really disrupt some people, isn't it? If you read all of Prabhupada's books, you'll hear the word should, 68. There's 68,000 things you should be doing. Of those 68,000, how many do you think you're doing right now? 14, 12, 62. Yeah. So there may be thousands of shoulds. So now we have to understand should in the context. Because if you understand it wrongly, then if you can't do all 68,000 shoulds, you will go to your nearest tree and get a rope and stick it around your neck and say, well, I couldn't do all these. So it's time to quit. Again, we go back to that example that in the Vedas, in the Eastern tradition, they always start from the top. This is the goal. This is, that's how it starts. This is where we're going, right? We're going to America. So if you're in Croatia, we could say, well, next stop is, if you're going west, what's the next stop from Croatia? Italy or something? Oh, we're going to Italy. Okay, that's doable. We can go to Italy. You could probably even ride your bike to Italy if you had enough time. To ride your bike to America, probably you don't have enough time for that. So you should be going to America. That's the goal. So all the shoulds are the goals. And the goals are necessary. You need to know, right? You're entering university your first year, your goal is to get a PhD in astrophysics. Okay, that's good to know because then you can take the courses that will prepare you for that, all the math and the physics and engineering and so forth, astronomy. So we have to see the shoulds like that. The shoulds are, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is the goal. That's where we're going. If you take the should like, I'm supposed to be here today, some of the shoulds obviously are, but not all. And so if you take them all like, if I can't do it, I'm useless, that's a misunderstanding, right? And that's why a lot of devotees, when we hear what we should do in Krishna consciousness, instead of becoming blissful and happy and excited, they become just the opposite because they're not there yet. All right, you're not in America yet, but you're on the plane, have a good time while it's flying. Yeah, but we're not there. It's so far away. Yeah, but you'll be there. Yeah, but it's so long. What if something happens to the plane? We're not supposed to think that way. We're supposed to think, I'm in the process. This is ecstatic. Wherever I am in the process, this is wonderful because it's going to the destination. That's how we're supposed to think. Now, where are you going? I'm going for Krishna Prema. Well, you think you'll get it? I'm shooting for it. I don't know. That's what my guru told me to shoot for. So that's what I'm doing. And no need to be discouraged or depressed. You become excited by the goal, right? The first step is sambandha. Sambandha means connection. Connection with who? You and Krishna. So you can say sambandha is a kind of goal. We say prayojana is the goal, but prayojana is achieving the goal. Sambandha is actually pointing to the goal. Abhideya is what you do to get to the goal, and prayojana is you've gotten there. So when you hear the word should, don't be discouraged if you're not there. I think that's important. What do you think? That's important to know, contextualize. I think it's important. It's so important, I'll do a video on it. And then you can say, oh, he talked about that in class. Means I should means the goal. And so context is important, isn't it? You know, I could say something, and in your country, it has a certain meaning, which is distinct from the meaning it has in America. And what I say could be very upsetting to you, right? Whereas in America, it could even be a compliment or a word of encouragement. So context is important. Okay. 68,000 shoulds. That's a lot of shoulds. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. Okay. So this should, you know, this feeling of guilt, I should. How should I think? How should I speak? Which here Rambaru Prabhu is calling spiritual superego. That's the ego on steroids, I think. This is a big obstacle to our ripening because it feeds our sense of deficiency. There's something wrong with me. Oh, really? Welcome to the club. I think there's something wrong with all the 8 billion people on this planet. They don't have love of Krishna. Join the club. You're not unique. You're not special. You're just another person who has something wrong with them. But the difference between you and the other 8 billion people, minus the 1 million devotees or so, is that you recognize there's something wrong with you. You recognize that you don't have love of Krishna. That's good. So instead of being depressed about what you recognize, rejoice in the fact that I recognize I'm a fool. That's better than not recognizing I'm a fool. But then we think, well, I recognize I'm a fool, so I'm going to go home and cry because I realized I'm a fool. No, dance, jump up and down. You're one of the rare ones who recognized you were a fool. And because you recognize you're a fool, that means you can stop acting like a fool. So that's good, right? Congratulations, fools and rascals. You've realized you're a fool and rascal. That's the beginning. That's the beginning. So rejoice in recognizing what's wrong with you, because most people don't. And rejoice in recognizing that you've got 68,000 shoulds to guide your life. Just don't expect immediate results. Results will vary, but all the results are good, much better than not having Krishna consciousness, right? I'm not advancing fast enough. Well, it's better than not advancing at all, right? So that's how to see it. Okay. Trying to live up to an ideal instead of being authentically where you are can become a form of inner violence if it splits us into and pits one side against the other. So we're going to do a play. The mind says, you're such a fool. Why do you think I'm a fool? Because you do foolish things. Leave me alone. I'm not going to leave you alone. You have to recognize you're a fool. But okay, I recognize I'm a fool. Can you leave me alone now? No, I'm going to tell you all the bad things you do. Well, just leave me alone. No, this is going on. Crazy, isn't it? Like two enemies living together, at least one. Trying to live up to an ideal instead of being authentically where you are can become a form of inner violence if it splits us in two and pits one side against the other. When we use spiritual practice to, quote, be good and to ward off an underlying sense of deficiency or unworthiness, then it turns into a sort of crusade. I think she's saying you may have a low self-esteem and you want to, jack yourself up spiritually as a solution. Well, yeah, it can be a solution, but it often just is at the cost of not actually dealing with the problem. If the ethos of a spiritual organization leads to dismissing our feelings and relational needs, this can lead to big communication problems. It is also not a good combination for a marriage if one or both partners is dismissive of emotional needs. So it is not surprising that in our spiritual organization, marriages often turn out to be just as dysfunctional interpersonally as in any non-spiritual organization. So I think this is a good point. We've talked about this a lot. If you're living alone and you're doing sadhana and you're not working closely with other devotees, and you hear topics like this, you might think, what is the relevance of these topics? Why are we talking about them? It doesn't seem to be part of our philosophy, part of our shastra. But the relevancy becomes obvious when you're in close relationships, because all the stuff comes out in close relationships. And so a lot, if not all of what she's talking about, it's necessary to understand as far as you can, at least a little bit understand it when you're married, because it all comes up. And therefore, if your solution to problems is to chant Hare Krishna whenever there's a problem, which of course is a great idea, but sometimes it's a means of avoiding the problem. And you apply that to close relationships where relational issues need to be dealt with and healed, solved, then the relationships, your chanting of Hare Krishna can make the relationships worse because you're avoiding, right? So you live in a cave, no problem. Even you live in an ashram, maybe it's not such a big problem because you're not together for life and you don't have to have, there's no expectation to have these fantastic relationships with everyone there. But when you're married or when you're working closely with someone on a project and it requires that you work well together, then the issues we're discussing, they become relevant, if not essential. So that would be my answer to why are we discussing this? Amongst other answers, this would be one answer. Why are we discussing this? Because it becomes necessary when you're trying to develop deeper, closer relationships. And also becomes necessary when you're trying to develop a better relationship with yourself. In other words, understand yourself, why you act the way you act, why you do what you do, why you think the way you think. Because a lot of times the way we act is not the way, we don't understand why we're acting that way. You know how you do something and you don't like it and you say, I can't understand why I do that. I don't even like doing it, right? So understanding our own processes is important to improve ourselves. Now, if you come to me and say, I do this, I don't know why, we could trace it out. We could find out why. there is a reason. And once you understand the reason, it becomes often easier to resolve or heal or